Hi, this is Stephen Aldridge from Numeritas. I'm going to talk to you a bit about user-friendly models, how to make your models more user-friendly, and why we might want to do that. First of all, models are quite often now complex things. There's a lot going on, a lot of inputs, and when you first get hold of one as a user, it can be difficult to know what's going on. So really what you want to do is to get an overview. So we can help the user by doing by building in a navigation diagram, and this is the sort of thing that we include in our models. This shows each of the main sheets in the model and the major logic flows. That just gives a user an overview first of all of what's going on in the model. Also, this is color coded, and the colors can match the sheets in the model, or the tabs of the model, and we can then help to get a high-level view. If I hover over one of these boxes, you'll also see that the box is hyperlinked, so by clicking on that, this will take me to whichever sheet it is I've clicked on. In this case it's the input sheet, so let's click there, and that takes us through to the input sheet. And on each sheet we've got another hyperlink that's for navigation that will take us back again to this diagram. So what other ways are there that we can make it easier for a user to find their way around a model? One thing is to use familiar layouts. So for example, if we go to the reports sheet, a standard income statement, balance sheet and cash flow layout that we've got here will be familiar to anybody that's familiar with using accounting statements, and we should use the same order of things in calculations as much as possible to help any user that should be familiar with these things to find their way around. Let's just scroll back up here. Also, just keeping a consistent layout with headers that are have a hierarchy can help just to find your way around. Before we move off this sheet though, see what happens if we scroll across to the right, then we lose those titles, and similarly if we scroll down then we lose the timeline header. So what's really useful is to be able to freeze those, and what we can do is if we click here and click on view in the ribbon, we can freeze panes, and that means that when we scroll across the title stays still, and if we scroll down the timeline header stays still, so we can see what's going on. So we have some principles that we use when we're building models, and simplicity is one of the key ones. You want to keep things as simple and easy to understand as possible. Let's take a look back over at one of the other tabs. We've got what we call a user guide here. Just here you'll see the headings. This is not fully populated, but as we scroll down we've got all the styles that we use within the workbook, and there is another video on styles on our website that explains how to use those within a model. But you'll see there are standard headings that we use just for the titles, and there's different levels of those, so you can see where you are. There's some input styles, calculation styles, and the commonly used number formats that we're going to be using. So let's skip back to the input sheet again. Now here you'll see that we've used the input style, which is this pale yellow, for any cells which a user will need to change. This particular set here is for inflation, and we've got inflation figures across the timeline here for each time period, but sometimes you want to see what the results are without inflation included, and so we've got a switch here. This allows us to switch on or off inflation as a whole, and you'll see that this little pull down arrow appears here when you select that cell. By clicking on that we see what the options are, and in this case it's a very simple list of true or false. You can actually have lists which are much longer than this, and they can be dynamic lists built on something else in the model. But see what happens when I switch this from true to false. This is how we would switch inflation off in the model, and just keep your eyes on the input on the right hand side here. As I click false, that turns grey, these cells here are greyed out. And that's to notify the user that those actually aren't being used at the moment, they're not active. That this is done by conditional formatting. By using that sort of technique, you can make it easier for a user to understand what options are currently live and active in the model. Another useful approach that we've got, you can see in here, if we just look at column L, this is where we've got the units that apply to each row in our model. So here we've got percentage, we've got pence per kilowatt hour, etc. That just makes it a little easier for anybody looking at the model to know what that inputs row or calculation row represents and what the units are in there. Also, it's worth noticing that the timeline starts here over at column M. So we've given ourselves a fair amount of space on the left, and if we just select one of the calculation sheets, you can see here much the same approach. On the left we sometimes have cells which are not time dependent, and so we give ourselves a few columns for that. That includes things like the units column here, but we may well have other calculations that apply to the whole timeline, and we don't want to we want to keep those separate, so they'll stay in those columns there. Also on this sheet you'll notice that on the left here we've got these bars which correspond to the different heading levels that we've got, and at the top we've got these 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and those represent the different levels of grouping that we've applied in this model. And by clicking on the different levels we can expand or collapse those different grouping levels. If we click on 3, then it collapses that third level. Click on 2, it collapses the second level, and so on. And here we've got individual pluses and minuses, and by clicking on a plus we expand a level, and by clicking on minus we collapse a level. So you can do this for the whole model, for the whole sheet, or just for an individual section that you want to see. And that can help considerably because you can set it up so that you have titles, and you can collapse to the title view, see where you want to go. We want to look at site 1, let's open that up, and then you can see what's in there. Other simple things such as formatting numbers appropriately. Here we've got some numbers that are formatted with no decimals, percentage, some here that in fact if these numbers are positive they would be a similar format, but because they're negative they're showing as red with brackets around them, which makes it very obvious that those are negative numbers. Sometimes a little minus sign, that's one way of formatting negatives, can be difficult to spot. One other useful technique that's built into Excel as standard, if you want to draw attention to something or explain something in a model, then you can apply a comment to a cell. And so if we want to make a note in this cell that we can to inform a user of something, if we look up here on the quick access toolbar that I've got, which you can build, clicking on this puts a little comment in there, and I can type some sort of explanation in there. Now if I click elsewhere, all that you see now is a little red blob in the corner, but when I hover over it the note pops up again. And in the Excel options you can decide whether you want those notes to be permanently visible or just visible when you hover over them. Now in addition to the input style I showed you on the input sheet, we use some styles to show a user what's going on in each cell, what the purpose of a cell is. You'll notice that some of these are blue, some are white, some are green. The blue cells represent a reference to another part of the model, so this is where you're pulling through data from either an input or another calculation. The white cells are calculation cells, where the hard work is done, and then green cells essentially are an output from this block of calculation, so this is just a summary output. So that means that really we should only have linkages between the blue and green cells and possibly input cells in the model. That makes it much easier to see what's going on So each of these calculations is effectively a small module on its own that that you can check independently. There are a number of sections within a model where you can build in error checks. You know that something should reconcile, should equal the same number. A good example of this is if we just skip to the reports sheet. Now, although this isn't populated, the error cells are here. We've got error checks here to make sure that the balance sheet balances and reconciles with the profit and loss account and so on. And you can have these throughout your model just to check that numbers that should be equal are, or that numbers that total to 100% actually do so, and so on. The catch is, as a user, you really want to know if all those error checks are currently showing that they're correct. So what we do is on the top of each sheet, within the freeze panes area, we have these 4 cells, and these come from a central error check sheet, which we'll jump to here. And we can have various different types of error checks here. So you can always navigate back here to find out if there is an error, where that's occurring, and you can pull through all of your error checks to this sheet, and sometimes we see quite large groupings of error checks. But that does give us confidence in the model, and then also if something that should be checking correctly is not doing so, then you know where to go and look, and looking at these error checks up here tells you very quickly whether there is a problem somewhere else in the model. Okay, well that's covered quite a few areas in which we can make a model more user-friendly. I hope that's useful. Please do look at some of our other videos on the website, and we hope to see you back here again soon. Thank you very much.